أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another episode of After the Prophet, brought to you by the Ahlul Bayt American Society and Tasneem Institute. So we've been speaking about the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan. We've mentioned that there was widespread frustration and discontent with this new government. And in our last episode, we spoke about the opposition and the dissent of one of the senior companions of the Prophet by the name of Abu Dhar al-Ghifari. Abu Dhar represented one of the most outspoken companions of the Prophet during the reign of Uthman, and his efforts and his outspokenness eventually led to his banishment. He was the type of person that just could not remain silent in the face of the corruption that he saw, and he ultimately paid the highest price, the price that many people have paid throughout history for speaking truth to power, and eventually he ends up living in exile and dying in exile. Now, Abu Dhar was not the only companion who had issues with Uthman and his government. In the famous book, Al-Imama wa Siyasa, Ibn Qutaybah reports that 10 Sahaba, 10 companions of the Prophet, gathered and discussed the actions of Uthman that deviated from the Sunnah of the Prophet, and not just deviated from the Sunnah of the Prophet, but also kind of departed from the political norms that were established by Abu Bakr and Umar. So Uthman represented a departure from both the Sunnah and the practices of the previous caliphs. Now, among the criticisms that were raised by other companions, so we're speaking about companions other than Abu Dhar, among the criticisms was the nepotism and the favoritism. Uthman, being a member of the Umayyads, entrusted public positions and government affairs to his relatives. So during the reign of Uthman, you have all of these young men who were inexperienced, who did not have any religious merit. They did not have any political or any expertise in the management of people. They were appointed to these influential positions, and essentially their only qualification was that they were Umayyad. So these companions, according to Ibn Qutaybah, 10 of them they come together and they address the nepotism, and they voice their concerns over this culture of favoritism. They also took issue with the financial misconduct of Uthman and his governors. Uthman generously distributed land grants and stipends and gifts to some of the people in Medina who had no connection to the Prophet, who did not participate in jihad or defend the community. It was kind of an arbitrary distribution of funds that were not really based on anything that was coherent, logical, or warranted in any way. Another issue that was discussed by some of the Sahaba, and this is something that was quite significant and angered a lot of the companions, and that is the marginalization of the Muhajirin and the Ansar. You know, as we know, the companions of the Prophet, they fall into one of these two main categories. You have the Muhajirin, who constitute the minority, and then you have the Ansar, the residents of Medina, and And some of the most prominent companions of the Prophet are the Muhajirin. And specifically, he excludes the early Muhajirin, who have the most religious credibility in the community. So he excludes them, the Muhajirin and the Ansar, from government roles. And to make matters even worse, not only does Uthman exclude the early Muhajirin from any positions in his government, but he doesn't even consult with them in decision making. Uthman just relies on his own judgment and the judgment of his inner circle, which was essentially represented by the likes of the corrupt Marwan ibn al-Hakam. Another issue, another criticism that some of the companions had of Uthman was the use of harsh punishment tools. Whereas the two previous caliphs used simple sticks, Umar was known for his dirra, his whip. Uthman used to use more harsh instruments to punish dissenters, to punish people who represented political opposition. So there was a new level of harshness in terms of the way that people were punished. And we saw that even in our previous episode, when we spoke about how Abu Dhar was transported from Damascus back to Medina, there's a bit of cruelty that you see in the message that Uthman writes to Muawiyah, saying to him that when you bring him back, put him on the most uncomfortable animal. Basically, make him suffer in his journey back to Medina. And of course, this type of treatment does not have any legal justification. Among the criticisms that were raised by some of the companions was, and this is also related to the issue of nepotism and favoritism, is that Uthman builds what you can call 7 mansions for his wife Naila and his daughters. So many of the companions, they saw this as unbecoming of a caliph. If you look at Umar ibn al-Khattab, of course we have our reservations and our criticisms of Umar ibn al-Khattab, but if you were to talk about lifestyle, Umar lived a much more simple lifestyle than Uthman. Uthman was extremely extravagant. I mean, for someone to build 7 mansions for his wife and his daughters is something that was seen as unbecoming of a caliph. Another issue that was raised, another criticism, was the privatizing of public land. He used to designate vast grazing lands around Medina exclusively for his camels. So Uthman is basically looking at the Islamic empire and essentially carving out parts of it for his own use. And he would limit access to those lands. He would limit it for others. Another issue that was raised, and this is perhaps one of the most egregious financial, one of the most egregious examples of financial corruption. We know that khums is an important revenue for the state, and it represents an important resource for the marginalized, for the poor. According to the historical accounts, Uthman ibn Affan gives the khums of North Africa to who? To Marwan ibn al-Hakam. He gives it to, a fellow Umayyad. And of course, when you give someone like that the khums of North Africa, essentially what are you doing? You're misappropriating funds and you are depriving the marginalized, the poor, the orphans, the needy from their God-given right. So when we talk about the khums of North Africa, we're not even talking about the khums of a few wealthy people or a village. We're talking about the khums of North Africa. Astronomical amounts of money are being handed over to the relatives and the family members of Uthman ibn Affan. And of course, Marwan ibn al-Hakam, anyone who looks into the biography of this individual Suffice it to say that this was the man who was pressuring the governor of Medina to behead Imam al-Hussein for his refusal to give bay'ah to Yazid. This is just one of the many crimes of this individual. A man who was known for his enmity to the family of the Prophet. This Marwan ibn al-Hakam is basically the shadow Khalifa. And in addition to all of this, in addition to the nepotism, the financial corruption, some of the governors that were being appointed by Uthman were individuals who had no fear of God, who would openly violate the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They would violate the Sharia. One example is Al-Walid ibn Uqba. He was a governor for Uthman in Kufa. And of course, he was also the half-brother of Uthman. And these governors, they were not just political leaders. They were also given religious duties. So they used to lead Jama'ah prayer. So imagine this Walid ibn Uqba, the brother-in-law, the half-brother of Uthman, he's leading Salatul Fajr in Kufa. And he leads Salatul Fajr drunk. He was an alcoholic. And Salatul Fajr is how many rak'ah? It's 2 rak'ah. Because he was intoxicated, this is the history of Islam. People are wondering about, why the Muslim world is so backwards. This is our history. This is what happens when people ignore the instructions of the Prophet. So Uthman appoints this individual. He becomes drunk. He's in a state of intoxication. Instead of praying 2 rak'ah for Fajr, he prays 4 rak'ah of Salat al-Fajr. And then he jokingly asks if people want to add more rak'ahs to the Salah. Now when this was brought to the attention of Uthman, he delayed. He kept on delaying the implementation of the legal punishment on him. So he's very strict. Uthman is very strict with people like Abu Dhar, but very lenient with fellow Umayyads. Even fellow Umayyads who are openly defying the ahkam of Islam. So during the last 5 or 6 years of Uthman's reign, things become much more heated around the Islamic world. Al-Waqidi, the famous historian, he reports that in the year 34 after the Hijrah, the people began to speak harshly and critically about Uthman, more severe than their criticism of really any figure. And the companions of the Prophet, they would hear this and they would not stop the people from criticizing Uthman. They didn't say that, this is a Sahabi of the Prophet, don't speak ill of him, because they saw that the criticism was justified. The anger of the masses was justified. So even the Sahaba, when they're hearing people badmouth Uthman, they don't really intervene. Many of them, they let it be. So the situation becomes so tense that the people, they go to Ali ibn Abi Talib and they complain to him about Uthman ibn Affan. So they essentially request Amir al-Mu'mineen to act as a mediator between Uthman and the rest of the Muslims. So Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Mazloom Amir al-Mu'mineen, he goes and on behalf of the Muslims who have grievances, he goes to Uthman and he advises him to address these legitimate grievances that people have. Sheikh al-Mufid, in his book Al-Jamal, he wrote a book on the Battle of Jamal, and of course to speak about Jamal you also have to speak about the events that happened before it. So Sheikh al-Mufid, he gives us a glimpse, he gives us an excerpt of some of the things that Amir al-Mu'mineen says to Uthman. He says, Amir al-Mu'mineen says to Uthman, وَإِنَّ شَرَّ النَّاسِ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ إِمَامٌ جَائِرٌ. Indeed, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says to Uthman, this is kind of a private counsel, indeed the worst of people in the sight of Allah is an unjust leader. ضَلَّ وَضَلَّ بِهِ, is an unjust leader who goes astray and leads others astray. فَأَمَاتَ سُنَّةً مَعْلُومًا. The most evil of people is the one who extinguishes a well-known sunnah. وَأَحْيَا بِدْعَةً مَتْرُوكَةً, and who revives a forsaken innovation. Ali says this is the worst person. The worst person is that unjust leader who goes astray and who leads others astray, who extinguishes the prophetic way, who revives forsaken innovations. And then Ali ibn Abi Talib says to Uthman, وإني سمعت رسول الله يقول يؤتى يوم القيامة بالإمام الجائر وليس معه نصير ولا عاذر ويلقى في جهنم فيدور في جهنم كما تدور الرحى ثم يرتطم في غمرة جهنم. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says to Uthman that I heard the Prophet. He's giving him advice. He's giving him sincere advice. He says, I heard the Prophet say that on the day of judgment, the unjust leader will be brought forth with no helper and no excuse. Right now, Amir al-Mu'mineen is basically saying to Uthman that right now you feel safe and you're surrounded by Bani Umayyah, but there's going to come a day where none of these people are going to help you. No one is going to offer you any aid. You're going to be alone, standing before Allah for reckoning. And Allah, He will cast into hellfire the unjust leader. Allah will cast him into the hellfire where he will whirl around in it like a millstone. And then he will plunge into the depths of hell. And then Ali ibn Abi Talib says, وَإِنِّي أُحَذِّرُكَ اللَّهِ وَأُحَذِّرَكَ سَطْوَتَهُ وَنَقِمَاتَهُ. O Uthman, I warn you of Allah. I warn you of His might. I warn you of Allah's vengeance. فَإِنَّ عَذَابَهُ أَلِيمٌ شَدِيدٌ. For the punishment of Allah is painful and severe. وَأُحَذِّرُكَ أَن تَكُونَ إِمَامَ هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ الْمَقْتُولِ. And I warn you, lest you be the slain leader of this ummah. You're going down a very dangerous path, O Uthman. فإنه كان يقال يقتل في هذه الأمة إمام فيفتح عليها القتل والقتال إلى يوم القيامة ويلبس عليها أمورها. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says that it used to be said a leader will be killed in this ummah and it will unleash upon them killing and fighting until the day of judgment. Ali ibn Abi Talib is basically saying that if you don't fix your ways, if you don't change your course, you're going to be killed. And your killing is going to open up a great fitna that will continue until Yawm al-Qiyamah. And then he says, وَيُتْرَكُونَ شِيَعًا. And if this happens, people will be divided into factions. فَلَا يُبْصِرُونَ الْحَقَّ لِعُلُوِّ الْبَاطِلِ. People will not be able to perceive the truth due to the dominance of falsehood. يَمُوجُونَ فِيهِ مَوْجًا. They will surge in turmoil like waves. وَيَمْرُجُونَ مَرَجًا. And people will descend into chaos. وَسَكَتْ. This was Amir al-Mu'mineen's advice, that the situation is very serious. If you do not change your way, there will be long-term consequences for the Muslim community. Now Tabari, he reports the response of Uthman. فَقَالَ لَهُ عُثْمَانُ وَاللَّهِ لَقَدْ عَلِمْتَ الَّذِي قُلْتَ. Oh Ali, I know what you're saying. والله لقد علمت الذي قلت ولكن والله لو كنت مكاني ما عنفتك ولا أسلمتك ولا عبت عليك ولا جئت منكرا أن وصلت رحما وسددت خلا وآويت ضائعا. ووليت شبيها بمن كان يوليه عمر. Uthman, he says to Ali ibn Abi Talib that if you were in my position, O Ali, if you were the Khalifa, I would not have rebuked you, nor would I have abandoned you, meaning that you're now siding with the people, nor would I have found fault in you, nor would I have objected if you had maintained family ties. Subhanallah. Uthman is saying that everything that I'm doing with Bani Umayyah is because of Silat al-Rahim. He's making it out to be a sort of virtue. I'm just maintaining family ties, I'm fulfilling needs, I'm sheltering those who are lost, and I'm appointing people that Umar also appointed. Why are you blaming me for something that Umar did? فهل تعلم أن عمر ولى معاوية في خلافته كلها وأنا وليته? Don't you know that Umar appointed Muawiyah throughout the entirety of his khilafah? And I have appointed him too. I'm just continuing the legacy of Umar. فقال علي عليه السلام. The report in Tabari says what? فإن معاوية يقتطع الأمور دونك. Ali says there's a difference. Muawiyah now, under you, he is independently seizing authority without your command. He's doing whatever he wants because he knows that you're being weak. ويقول للناس هذا أمر عثمان فيبلغك وتعلمها ولا تغير عليه. Muawiyah, he does what he wants, and he tells people that this is the order of Uthman. And when this reaches you, when you come to know that he's doing things in your name independently without consulting with you, you don't stop him. And then he says, وَقَدْ كَانَ مُعَاوِيَةُ أَخْوَفَ مِنْ عُمَرٍ مِنْ يَرْفَأْ غُلَامُ عُمَرٍ مِنْ. He says Muawiyah, during the time of Umar, Muawiyah was more fearful of Umar than even Yarfa. Umar had an inexperienced young servant by the name of Yarfa. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says Muawiyah was more afraid of Umar than Yarfa was of Umar. Why? Because Umar was very strict with his governors. Now, what's interesting is that Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says to Uthman that you're saying that I'm doing the same thing that Umar did. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says فإن عمر كان من ولاه إن بلغه عنه حرف جلبه ثم بلغ به أقصى الغاية ويطأ على صماخه. Umar, of course, he had his issues. But Ali ibn Abi Talib says that you're not like Umar, you're different. Indeed, Umar, whenever he appointed someone, if he heard him even utter a single word of wrongdoing about him, he would summon him immediately and he would pursue the matter to the fullest extent and he would trample on his head. Umar was strict. If you do anything without Umar's permission, he'll stomp on your head. This is what Ali ibn Abi Talib is saying. He says, وَأَنْتَ لَا تَفْعَلْ. But you, O Uthman, you don't do that. You're very passive. He says, وَأَنْتَ لَا تَفْعَلْ ضَعُفْتَ وَرَقَّقْتَ عَلَىٰ أَقَارِبِكَ. He says, you've grown weak and you are too soft with your relatives. قال عثمان هم أقاربك أيضا. Uthman says to Ali that, oh Ali, they're your relatives too. After all, Quraysh, it's a super tribe and they're all related in some way. قال لعمري إن رحمهم مني لقريبة ولكن الفضل في غيرهم. Ali, he says, you're right. Their kinship to me is indeed close, but virtue lies elsewhere. Just because they're my kinsmen, it doesn't mean that I abandon morality. Now, as a result of the widespread corruption, Protests, they break out in Kufa, in Basra, and in Egypt. Delegations from these cities, they come to Medina in the year 35 after the Hijrah to essentially confront Uthman with a list of grievances and demand reform. Al-Mas'udi in Muruj al-Dhahab, he says, كان أهل مصر 600 رجل. Just from Egypt, 600 people came, and they were led by a man by the name of Al-Balawi. ومن الكوفة 100 رجل مع الأشتر. From Kufa, 200 protesters, they came under the leadership of Malik al-Ashtar. ومن أهل البصرة 100 رجل مع العبدي. And from Basra, there were 100 men led by Al-Abdi. So all of them, they descend upon Medina. Now, as the protesters approach the outskirts of Medina, Uthman, he turns to Ali ibn Abi Talib, seeking his help in mediating the crisis. And he essentially wants the protesters to withdraw peacefully from Medina. So Ali ibn Abi Talib, again, he responds to the call of duty, and he intervened, and he basically successfully negotiated a settlement between the two groups, between Uthman and the protesters. Now, among the terms of the agreement was that, number one, those who had been unjustly exiled would be permitted to return to their homes. So Uthman had exiled a number of dissenters. One of the agreements was that those who were unfairly exiled, they are to return to their homes. Among the things that was negotiated was that Baytul Mal would be distributed, the money in Baytul Mal would be distributed fairly, not based on clan and Umayyad loyalties. And administrative posts would be entrusted to qualified individuals with integrity. That the government positions would not only be given to Umayyads. So the protesters, they start to go back. The Egyptian protesters, they're heading back to Egypt. As they're heading back, they notice a fast-moving rider. A fast-moving rider. When they approached, they saw that this is a servant of Uthman by the name of Warsh. And he's riding one of Uthman's camels, and it seems that he's in a rush to get back to Egypt. So the protesters, they become suspicious of him. They stop him and they ask him where he's headed. And he says that I'm headed on a mission from Uthman. But he claimed that he wasn't sure what the mission was about, that he was sent with a message. So they decide to search this rider. Initially they find nothing, and then they find an empty water pouch. They open it and they find a sealed letter from Uthman. And the letter is addressing the governor in Egypt, Ibn A.B.A.S. And what does the letter say? The letter is from the office of Uthman, and it says, إذا أتاك كتابي هذا فاضرب عنق عبد الرحمن البلوي وأبي عمرو ابن بديل واقطع أيدي وأرجل كل من عروة وعلقمة وكنانة فإذا ماتوا فارفعهم على جذوع النخل. Uthman basically says to the governor of Egypt, strike the necks of Abd al-Rahman al-Balawi, and he basically lists all of the key protesters, the key figures in the rebellion. It basically calls for the execution and the mutilation of key protest leaders, despite the truce and the promises of amnesty. They get this letter, the Egyptians, they go back to Medina, they go to Amir al-Mu'mineen, and they hand the letter to Ali ibn Abi Talib. They say, look at what Uthman did. He promised that he was going to address our grievances. He just sent a letter with his rider telling the governor of Egypt to execute the protest leaders. So that when the protesters, when they show Ali ibn Abi Talib this letter, you can imagine how enraged Amir al-Mu'mineen was. That he puts himself in the position of a mediator. He basically convinces and persuades the protesters to leave. He saves the neck of Uthman only to be betrayed. So he enters, Ali ibn Abi Talib enters upon Uthman and he says, إِنَّكَ وَصَدْتَنِي أَمْرًا بَذَلْتُ فِيهِ الْجُهْدَ لَكَ وَفِي نَصِيحَتِكَ وَاسْتَوْهَبْتُ لَكَ مِنَ الْقَوْمِ. Ali says, you had entrusted me with a matter for which I exerted my utmost effort on your behalf and offered you sincere counsel. I even secured people forgave you. They were willing to forgive you for your past iniquities. Uthman says, what are you talking about? Ali shows him the letter. Uthman, he denies writing the letter. Ali says, do you recognize the handwriting? Of course, the handwriting was the handwriting of Marwan. He says that my handwriting might resemble, handwriting sometimes resembles. He says, do you recognize the seal? He says, I recognize the seal, but maybe someone imitated the seal. He says, your camel's missing. Do you recognize your camel? So he says, it's mine, but I did not command anyone to take it. Basically, Uthman tries to deny that he had anything to do with it. Even though he might have recognized that this is the handwriting of Marwan, he shows weakness. And at this point, Amir al-Mu'mineen realizes that we have now reached the point of no return. You have now shown the people that you are not interested in any reform. You have betrayed the trust of the people. فَقَالَ عَلِيٌّ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامُ أَمَّا فَأَنَا مُعْتَزِلُكَ. I try to help you. As for me, I disassociate myself from you. وَشَأْنُكَ وَأَصْحَابُكَ. Now it's you and your companions, you have to decide what you want to do. It's your problem now. وَخَرَجَ مِنْ عِنْدِهِ. Ali leaves. وَدَخَلَ دَارَ. Ali goes to his home. وَأَغْلَقَ بَابَ. And he locks his door. وَلَمْ يَأْذَنْ لِأَحَدٍ. Amir al-Mu'mineen essentially withdraws completely. He leaves Uthman to face the consequences of his own actions and the turmoil surrounding him. And inshallah, in the next episode, we'll speak about the assassination of Uthman ibn Affan and the events that took place after that assassination. Thank you so much, brothers and sisters, for tuning in once again. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.